Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos. Today we're going to go over how to name molecules. So make sure you get out a piece of paper, because this is not in your notes, and I need you to construct a table that looks exactly like this. So the same columns, the same order, everything. So everything has to be in the right spot. Make sure that you're following along. So what we're going to do is the first three as examples. So let's pretend that these are our first three and that they're numbered or something like that. And we have to decode the name and write the formula, or the formula and write the name. Alright, so you need to know your prefixes. You need to make sure you know your mono, di, tri, tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, and then deca. Alright, so now let's decode these names and formulas. Alright, so my first thing I should notice here is I have di, and then nitrogen, and then I have pent, and I have oxide. So what is di? Di is 2. So when I have dinitrogen, that means I have 2 nitrogen, so I have N2. Pent means 5, and oxide means that it's oxygen, so I have O5. And that is how I would decode that. Remember, in molecules, there are no crisscrossings of charges or anything. It literally is just, do you know your prefixes? And so make sure you don't kind of get those things confused. Alright, now next, I have NO, no, and I need to make sure I remember my rules. Alright, so the first one, I just write down, just nitrogen, because that's our first element. There's no prefix because it's the very first element in a compound. And so even though mono means 1, you'll never see mononitrogen at the beginning of a compound name. Okay, it's understood to be 1, unless you have to, sort of talk about the second element. So next up I have O, which would be oxide, but the problem is I only have 1. And so because I only have 1 oxygen, because it is the second element in the formula, I need to make sure I include mono in my formula name. So how do we turn mono and oxide into, sort of the same thing? It's monoxide, like this. It's not monooxide, so we don't have 2 O's next to each other, because anytime we have something with 2 O's next to each other, or a vowel, like A, next to an O, we automatically ignore sort of one of those vowels. And that's the reason, if you take a look at our very first one right here, that's the reason why it's dinitrogen pentoxide and not pentaoxide. That's why I chose these three to sort of start off with, because it gives us all of the rules all put together. So I have nitrogen monoxide, and so I would write that here. Again, in case you're wondering why it is not mononitrogen monoxide, it's because anytime there is a single of something, it's understood that there's only 1. So that's why we just have nitrogen. Now, anytime it's the second one, we're not certain of what the subscript would be, so we have to include mono to clarify that there's only 1 oxygen in this, and there's not 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or 10. Okay? Last but not least, we have tetraphosphorus decasulfide. Alright, so let's look over that. So again, first thing I should notice is tetra. That's one of my prefixes. And then I should notice deca. That's another one of my prefixes. So tetra, phosphorus, tetra means 4, so I would have P4. And then decasulfide, sulfide is sulfur, and deca is 10. So that would be P4S10. And that's the way that we write our formulas for molecules. So it really is important that you know your prefixes and that you remember your rules. Those rules consisting of anytime there is a single element in something, if it's the first thing, understood, so you don't have to worry about adding anything. If it is the second element, then you have to include mono. And anytime we put sort of an O or an A next to oxides, we always drop one of them. So that's why it's pentoxide, again, to point that out, it's right over here. And that's why it is monoxide and not monooxide, or something along those lines. So again, make sure that you fill in the rest of these, and if you have any questions, ask tomorrow.